Midlife Unfiltered, a podcast about unapologetically embracing the season of me as we live the lives we want in midlife and beyond. I'm Anita McLaughlin.
I'm Erica Webb. We're here to make some noise, say hell no to outdated stereotypes, and hell yes to living life on our terms.
Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Midlife Unfiltered. Thanks for joining us today. You are in for a real treat. We've got something lined up. I'm flying solo today. Erica's working on another project, but I'm thrilled to bring you this edition of Midlife Unfiltered today because it's about a topic that is not only very personal to me, but I know it will affect probably nearly each and every one of you who are listening today. Today, we're talking bone health, and I've got one of Australia's top bone health experts here in the hood to talk about that today. And bone health, it's really important because, we need to move, right? And without good bone health, how is 90-year-old you and me going to move well? We need strong bones for that. I don't want to be stuck sitting down, not able to move or lying down in my later years. 90-year-old me wants to be active, doing all the things that bring me joy. And I know you want that too for you. Tell me though, before we dive in, do you know your bone health status? I'm guessing that most of you out there don't. Now, that's not a slight on you. It's not your fault. It's actually part of the problem of our health system, that we don't know our bone health sooner in particular. But that's what our guest today is going to share with us. He's working on a way to help us know our bone status better, our bone health status better. Welcome, Dr. David Tognarini. How are you, David?
I'm well, Anita. Thank you. And thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm somewhat new to this bone health space. I've been here about 5 years, but it's been a wonderful journey and wonderful to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Your perspective is going to really widen our views on bone health and, wake us up a bit too, which I'm really excited for. Now, a little bit about you. You are a medical researcher by trade and an award-winning medical researcher, I'm led to believe. Is that right?
So yes, I did my PhD at the Royal Melbourne Hospital. It's actually in pharmacology, but in medical research. I have run a medical research patient support company for the last 20 odd years. And then we have also dovetailed into highly specialized distribution for very rare medical conditions. And yes, it's been a trip. It's been a real privilege to work in this space.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think our researchers, and if anybody is a researcher out there listening in, all hail and thanks to you because you are the unsung heroes of our health system, because without understanding what's going on, how the heck do we improve? How the heck do we move forward? So thank you for the work that you've done. And I want to say, in addition to being known as a health researcher and entrepreneur and innovator, I want to add disruptor to that as well. And I'm really excited for the disruption that you're bringing about, David. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, because this is a disruption that our bone health and our health industry, if you like, our health system needs. So can you tell our listeners what it is that you're working on and also why you've landed in this space?
Why we've landed in this space. So we... it might be easier to start with that question and then move to the, what we're working on. Essentially, we were doing some work, some really nice work, in a rare genetic disease. And just before COVID, we were talking with one of the major hospitals, Westmead actually in Sydney, because there was a paper that came out that said some people with this rare genetic disease, which were having osteoporosis in their early adulthood, so 20s and 30s. And we said, that's pretty shocking. And they said, yes, but we can't really, it's difficult to measure, and we don't want to subject 20, 30-year-olds to annual DEXAs, and getting access to a DEXA is hard. So I said, okay, so if we found a densitometer that was non-radiographic, would that help you? And they said, sure, David, that'd be fantastic. I go, great. It took me a year, Anita. It took me a year to find this thing.
Well, I'm sure you're very thorough, David.
Oh, well, there were a few failures along the way. But it was very exciting because we found REMS technology, which is Italian technology. We found it sort of at the end of 2019, when it had just published its first large clinical study. And then the truth of the matter is that we read this paper, we contacted them, it got really exciting, COVID hit. We're based in Melbourne, and you remember how locked down Melbourne was?
Oh, yeah, I'm with you now, yeah.
So my business partner and I, we must have had some sort of COVID fog, because we decided to buy the equivalent of 2 Italian cars on the internet and hope they'd just turn up in the post. I don't know if any of you or any of your listeners have done that. It's a pretty scary thought, pushing that pay now button. But we did, and they turned up, and it was just wonderful. It was just an incredible opportunity to have new technology in the country. But of course, we were still locked down. So we were basically scanning ourselves and any other family member I could find. And we realized that this was just, it was not just a research tool. We actually realized this was a game changer.
Yeah.
So we went to the trouble of getting it registered through TGA. So TGA is our Therapeutic Goods Administration. It is the Department of Health, which looks after all medications and also medical devices. So we registered the device. We worked with the assessor. They gave us, they did a very deep dive on the technology, but they approved the technology. That was a big step forward, because at that point, we then realized, again, the medical community then said, okay, this is now an approved medical device. At that, from then we did try and get it reimbursed. Medicare said, no, not yet. You need some more data. You need some more experience. And I have some sympathy for that. However, I was also a bit annoyed, because I thought there are many people who are missing out on densitometry scans, and this would make that gap. But okay, you want more data? I'll go get you more data. So we started clinics, but the game changer sort of coincided with that that Medicare advice. Go get more data. That was December 22. In January 23, there was another publication which came out. Now, this was their bone strength study. It's called a fragility score. And they'd actually looked at another way of measuring the bone architecture. So one measure measures density, this one measures bone strength. And I'm sure we'll talk much more about it.
We'll talk more about that, yeah.
But they published that in January 23. And that was a really much an aha moment, because now we could confidently measure bone integrity with both density and with a strength score. And so all of a sudden we were doubling the amount of information people were able to get. And that's when it really took off.
So that's fascinating. I'm always fascinated by stories of how things come to be. Can you tell us what this technology is,
Sure.
and how it is a little bit different to what you mentioned the word DEXA, and for some out there, they might not even know what a DEXA is. Can we talk a little bit about what this technology is that you've brought to Australia that not coincidentally, but incidentally has been in Italy for what, some 15 or so years, and Europe and the US, I don't know, I'm
Look,
guessing
I think,
maybe 10-ish?
yeah, no, probably not quite that long. So it's actually, as I said, it's Italian technology. The first papers came out around 2013. I would say it's been in clinic in Italy since about 2018, 2019. So
Mhm.
we're talking, sort of six or so years. The UK, there's a global leader in the UK. He started around about that time, 2019. There's some very prominent US clinicians in 2020. We started clinics 2023. So it's relatively new technology, in the grand scheme of
Scheme of
things.
things, yeah.
But tens of thousands of patients in clinical studies, many, many patients in clinical practice now.
So
So
this is
what
new
is
to
this
Australia,
technology?
but sorry, David. So this is new to
Yeah,
Australia, but not new to the world. Is I guess
correct,
my point. Yeah. So
correct.
tell us
But we
tell us
weren't
what it
that
is.
far behind. We weren't that far behind. I was pleased we got it here, pretty quickly.
But thanks to you, it's here, right? And that's,
Yeah,
take a bow. Thanks to you, it's here.
no, well, a leap of faith sometimes. So what is the technology? So um, to measure bone density, the current technology, DEXA, which has been around for around about 30 odd years, uses X-rays, two X-rays. It stands for dual X-ray. So one X-ray measures bone, one measures soft tissue, and then there's a calculation at the back that takes one away from the other, and you're left with what is the bone density. That has been the mainstay for, as I said, for decades.
Mm.
The Italians decided that there had to be a different way to actually measure the architecture, and they decided that one way to do it was actually using sound waves.
Mhm.
So the technology is called REMS, radio frequency echographic multispectrometry.
Mhm.
So we're using sound waves and we're putting sound waves through the bone architecture, and we are trying to record an echo that comes back. So hence the radio frequency echographic. And we're doing it around about 250 times in about 60 seconds. So that's quite impressive because we're pulsing all these sound waves and trying to record all these echoes that come back. The beauty about it is that the echo has been able to be calibrated such that it then measures bone density. So it actually, depending on how that echo is um, attenuated, changed, modified, they've been able to associate that with an actual bone density score. So it's quite incredible technology to think that in this sort of 60 to 90 seconds, I'm sending these hundreds of sound waves, trying to measure these hundreds of echoes, which then get essentially fractionated. And those different components of that echo then will relate to bone density or relate to bone strength.
And for most of the women listening or watching today probably have had an ultrasound or know what an ultrasound looks like. So it's, it uses what we call a transducer. That's the bit that goes on your body. And
Yes,
that's the piece of the equipment that generates those pulses,
correct.
sends them out and receives them. Right. And
It,
we
it
probably,
looks, it looks, yeah, it looks like ultrasound. I mean, we have a computer, we have the echographic unit, the ultrasound probe. We use the ultrasound simply to make sure that we use that image to find the bone we're looking for.
right.
So one of the things that really impressed me about the technology from the very beginning was that uh, it's not user dependent. So whether I'm holding the probe or one of my other staff or somebody else I've trained, if the probe is actually held in the right place, because we've got the image, we see, okay, there's the femoral neck, right? I'm above it, my settings are correct. I push go, and then all the sound waves start pulsing. we're trying to record all the echoes. So if the device gets enough data, then it will give you a result. However, if the operator is not in the right position, or for whatever reason the device is not getting enough of the echoes back, it won't actually have enough data. So then it gives you zero. And I love that about it, because then as a diagnostic, you want it to be confident in the results you get, not just in a guess of where it is. So then we just repeat the scan, and we just keep repeating until we get all the data. We're a bit of a data junkie, Anita. So I think
Well,
you had a scan, and I know, Jo was emphatic to get everything that you needed before she let you go. So
yeah, yeah. And that's how this conversation has come to be. So a bit of a backstory. I have osteoporosis. I was diagnosed when I was 51. I'm now almost 58. And I've had 3 DEXA scans in my time. And 2 out of those 3 DEXA scans, so that's where you lie on an X-ray table, if you like, and the machine measures your bone density, and then you get this little report, and we'll talk about reporting a bit later on as well. And it gives you a score, a T-score, which is your bone density score. And because I had this overactive parathyroid gland, I was hyperparathyroid, and it zapped the calcium out of my bones. So that was the need for my very first DEXA scan, and I've had that gland removed. Now, there's a couple of points I want to make here. For many of you listening, and this goes back to my first question, do you know your bone status? Here in Australia, the standard is, unless you have a condition which is known to affect your bone health, and osteoporosis is the leading cause of deteriorated bone health. You don't get that through Medicare. We've spoken about Medicare, which is a rebatable scan or assessment, a DEXA, until
Correct.
you are 70. Now, I was 51. I went through menopause about that time. So if the health system is saying you have to wait until you're 70 to get your first bone scan, that's 20 years post-menopause. Now, we want to live longer, and we want to live longer well. And there is a gap there, right? There is a gap there of, 5 to 8 years for many of us. But that is an even bigger gap in our health system, to go from, menopause to 70, 20 years before I'm eligible for a free scan. So that's probably why you haven't had a bone scan yet, ladies. If you're in that bucket, it's not your fault. But back to why even menopause, and talk about that, is that from an osteoporotic point of view, those perimenopausal years, those years before we stop menstruating for 12 months, which is the definition of menopause, that point in time, and for the few years after that, that is when we lose our bone mass, our bone strength dramatically as women. I think we lose between 10 and 20%. From the age of about late 20s, early 30s, for men and women, our bone mass starts to decline steadily. But as women, we get this drop off around about our menopausal years. So it's really important, I can't stress it enough, to understand your bone health sooner rather than later. And getting back to the DEXA scans, which is what was readily available then, before REMS became something in Australia, I had 2 very different outcomes from my DEXA scans.
Okay.
And that got me thinking, my endocrinologist even said to me, we can't use the data from this second scan, because it is so different. It showed an improvement of over 15 or 20%. And we know that bone doesn't improve that dramatically in such a short time usually.
Yeah.
So I started to doubt DEXA. And that's when I did some Google searching. I thought there must be something else out there that can help me understand my bone health with greater accuracy. And that's when I came to find REMS, what you've introduced. And yes, I saw Jo here in Brisbane. And it was so easy. It took literally, I think, 15 minutes. It was painless, and I knew it was radiation free. which was also a bonus. But then I took then I also had a DEXA done around about the same time because I was curious. How does the DEXA compare to the REMS from a reporting point of view? And I discovered that there wasn't that much of a difference actually in my reporting for it. But where there was a difference, and this alludes to the information that you said was additional that REMS supplied, was I got a fragility score. And when we're talking about bone health, ladies, it's really important to understand that we're not just talking about a measure, we're talking about fracture. Because if you fracture your hip in particular in your later years, there's a 1 in 4 chance that you're going to die within the first 12 months of fracturing that hip. And then a 33% chance thereafter for the year after that where you're severely incapacitated. So it's really important that we keep an eye on our bone health from a fracture risk point of view. And that's where REMS was fantastic. And it gave me hope that I was on the right track, or my bones weren't all was not lost with my bone health. It gave me hope because I had a great bone strength score. So I think that's really important too, because it's, if we don't have a good bone health score, they can inject a lot of fear into us, and then that holds us back as well. So that was my personal journey and how I came to find REMS and why we're having the chat today, because I want more women to know about this option. So shall we talk now, David? So I know that took a little bit of time to get to the point.
Thank you for sharing that. Really, it's and if I scan 10 people in a clinic, I probably have very similar. Probably 3 or 4 of them have very similar sort of experiences. And you're absolutely right. We live in the lucky country in many ways, but the health system is not able to, I think, sort of cope with, the amount of densitometry that is now recommended. So because there's a difference between what's recommended and what's reimbursed. There was still, I think, when we looked at it in 2023, there was still 1 million DEXA scans that were reimbursed by Medicare. So it's a large chunk. But the experts are now saying exactly what you pointed out, that everybody should have a baseline scan at least sometime in their 50s. The best case scenario is pre-menopause and post-menopause. So you can actually get those 2 points in time to see, all right, where is your bone status pre and post? Because then you've got a line of best fit. And then it's checking it post every couple of years, depending on what those results actually find. And then you actually get an understanding of the trajectory of what your bone status is actually going to do. Let me be very clear. We all will deteriorate over time.
Yep.
The question will be, what's the rate of deterioration? And what can you do in between to actually maximize that?
Yeah.
And I really also want to make the point, if I don't make it now, we must make it towards the end, that fracture risk is the ultimate goal, right? We have to really reduce our fracture risk. And whilst bone integrity is a component of that, so is muscle integrity and so is balance.
Yes.
So it is multifocal as well. But I'm sure we'll get to that later.
Yeah, well, we can go there a bit now, because that's another reason to want to get that baseline that you're talking about done perimenopause and postmenopause for women, and in their 50s for men as well, because this is not just a woman's only disease. Men suffer with osteoporosis as well. Trying to get them into get a scan will be probably even more challenging.
Please, ladies, if you're listening, please, let's talk about that for a quick second. There is a hip fracture registry in Australia and New Zealand. It's been around for decades. God bless those guys who set it up. So about in Australia, 64% of fractures happened in women. But therefore, actually, let me get that exact number, which I have. So 66% of hip fractures happened in women. So therefore, 34% of hip fractures happened in men too. But I can tell you, less than 10% of my patient caseload are men.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a disconnect. Two papers came out last year, both very large reviews, and one study actually found men fracture with osteopenia, not with osteoporosis.
Mm-hmm.
So they're actually fracturing with better bone density and than what women are. And you think to yourself, goodness, so they do fracture, they're fracturing higher up the scale. And interestingly, the fragility score is able to differentiate and actually be a predictor of fracture as well. And I'm seeing a lot of blokes who come in and their bone density is not so bad, but their fragility scores are terrible. So
Right.
they are a fracture risk.
Yeah.
So ladies, if you're listening, please, if you love your partner, get them to have a scan as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And make sure you get one at the same time with them if you haven't had one. But yes.
If you know, book a double appointment, have a double day, whatever. I don't mind. It's a great
Yeah.
way to sort of get both aligned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm working on that. Believe me, I'm working on that. But let's get back to this agency and the reason why, another powerful reason why get that bone scan done sooner rather than later is because there is so much literally in our hands that we can do to improve our bone health. Exercise, the right exercises, bone loading exercise. The work of Dr. Belinda Beck here in Brisbane has been groundbreaking and recognised internationally now.
Yes.
So there is a lot we can do, isn't there, David? Just with how we exercise and what we eat, our diet as well, that can support our bone health. So it's really important that we understand our baseline and, as you say, the trajectory of decline potentially, because by looking after our bones, we can actually slow down that rate of decline and make sure that, we are stronger and fitter in our later years. So
No,
it's really important. We have the power, ladies. We have the power and we should absolutely use it. Shall we
that's
talk a little bit more about the scoring, David? So and bone density and bone strength, because they're two very different parameters. Our bones are made of hard cortical bone on the outside and then
yes,
softer trabecular bone in the middle, which is more like a network
correct.
of bone. So can you just briefly bring our listeners up to speed on density and strength and then fragility score?
Sure. And indeed, I might even see if I could share a slide, which might actually help sort of put this into perspective, because I think it's
Yep.
what is absolutely fascinating. And the medical community knew this. They knew that density was only one parameter, but it could not be the only parameter that indicated fracture risk.
Yep.
You ask any endocrinologist, they will have a patient with osteoporosis who had a bad fall but didn't break, and then they had a patient with osteopenia who fell and shattered. And there had to be something else other than just density. So the concept of bone strength has been around for quite some time, but it's been very difficult to actually measure. And there's a couple of ways people have tried to measure it, but it really hasn't worked out so well. Now I'm just going to try and bring up this
Yep. I'll
slide.
add it now for you. There we go.
Is that there?
Yep, we can see it. I know it's difficult. You might not be able to, but it's there. I can see
Le-
3 spinal vertebrae there.
Correct. So
Okay.
the image on the left really is trying to give you an idea of what is the actual density within that bone. You're absolutely right. The bone has a corticobone outer shell, and inside there is a scaffolding of trabecula, and it's a massive network of scaffolding within the bone to try and essentially give it some internal structure. What's really important is that that structure has to be organized. And the if you ask any engineer, you can have a whole bunch of scaffolding, but if the scaffolding's not organized and actually orientated correctly to give it tensile strength, then that scaffolding may not be that useful. And I think that's a really important analogy to try and
Mm.
picture. So the image on the right talks about what the actual structure of the trabecula is in terms of tensile strength. And so it has strength sort of lines, if you like, within the bone, going up, going across, creating that network of internal strength scaffolding within the bone. And we've known about this for some time, but what we haven't been able to do is actually have some way of actually measuring it, at least not in routine clinical practice. Um, so, and I explain this to people, and probably not dissimilar to your own results. In your case, the scaffolding might have been a bit sparse because the density wasn't so high, but the actual integrity of that scaffolding was exceptionally good.
Mm.
So, in essence, are you making the scaffolding out of steel, out of timber, out of balsa wood? It's a really interesting sort of idea that you can have lower density, but you can have good tensile strength. And I think this is a really big mind shift change. I mean, you talked
Yeah.
about being a disruptor.
Mm.
This is really now putting it into a much putting it right out there that the two of them can actually be quite opposed. You can have low density but high strength. Let me reverse it though. I have a very significant proportion of patients whose density is okay in the sense that they're osteopenic, maybe even sometimes bordering on normal, but their fragility scores, their bone strength scores are actually very bad.
Right.
So
Right.
imagine there's a lot of scaffolding, but it hasn't actually been put together very well,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or it's deteriorated over time. The
Mm.
scaffolding was there, it had a really good structure for 70 years, but now all the joints have deteriorated. If you're thinking about steel scaffolding, all of a sudden all the bolts are rusted. And now
Mm.
you've got a situation where you might have a lot of scaffolding, but it is in fact not that strong. And
So
they're actually a group that worries me significantly.
yeah, and that's where I'm going, I guess, with my thought there is what is potentially more worrying, or should we put equal weight on strength and density, or we need both to be in good condition.
Look, it's a good question. I think it depends on which side of the cycle you sit on. I'm just going to go into a case example. So I have permission to share these images,
Great.
from these two people and their results.
Yep.
Um, and it's really interesting because one of these women has osteoporosis, one has a significant fracture risk. And for those who are listening, I've got one younger woman who's sort of in midlife, and she's deadlifting quite a bit of weight there. And I've got an older woman on the other side who's smiling and curling a few hand curls. And interestingly, when we've gone through these particular patients, one has osteoporosis, one has osteopenia. But interestingly, if I scroll right down to come back to here, the woman who is doing the deadlifting actually has a very good fragility score. So whilst her density is low, her fragility scores are actually in the green. And
That was
indeed, if
me.
I look at her, yep,
That was me.
if I look at her femoral neck, she's in osteopenia, so that range between normal and osteoporosis. But her fragility scores are at athlete level. They are exceptionally good. Um, Whereas if I look at the older lady, she's in osteopenia, but to date, her fragility scores are some of the worst I've ever seen. So she's deep in the red in her fragility score from both her lumbar spine and her femoral neck was in a similar position.
But her
And I
density
noticed
was fine.
your density was okay, but her
Mm,
fragility was really bad. Now,
mm,
I know she's fragile because she had a standing fall fracture on her shoulder.
right, right.
Um, and I know both of these two because one is my mother and one is my wife.
The
So,
big reveal.
so I can tell you, my wife is not fragile. But I absolutely know my mother is. But it really isn't. And if you looked at the first page of the report, you would
Mm,
probably go, okay, the one who's osteoporotic, who's got osteoporosis, by
mm,
definition, saying that she's got low density is
mm,
actually not a fracture risk.
mm.
Whereas my mother is absolutely a fracture risk.
Yeah, right.
Um, so back to your question, which is more important? Hard to say.
Mm,
I'll stop sharing because the it depends on which side of the fence you sit on. If you're on the density side, you're saying, well, density is the most important. That's what we've studied for 30 years. We know if you have osteoporosis, you are prone to fracture. No question, no debate, totally agree. Um, However, if you are on the bone strength side, it says, well, actually, your microarchitecture is more important than your density. And looking at what that internal structure actually shows might give you a better indication of fracture. And that was the game changer in 23 when the Italians published that study. So they scanned 2,000 people at baseline, and then they followed them for 5 years. 1,500 women, 500 blokes,
right.
and in that time, about 250 had a fracture. And they went back to the baseline and they looked at the density by DEXA, the
Mm-hmm,
density by REMS, and the
mm-hmm,
fragility score. And it turned out that in some cases, so in a female lumbar spine fracture, all three were predictive of fracture risk. So if you had low density, bad fragility scores, you were a fracture risk. But in the female femoral neck, in the male lumbar spine and male femoral necks, the fragility score was a better indicator of fracture than what density was.
right.
So
Yeah.
th-
Boom.
that
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
changed it for those of us in this space. And we said, well, at least now look at both parameters.
Look at both. Yeah. David, that's really an eye opener. And seeing those comparisons of your wife and your mother, it really does explain the importance of understanding our bone strength and getting that fragility score. And we talk about the femoral neck, girls, because that's typically even, for DEXA scans, that's the part of our skeleton that is used as an area of interest to measure things from. Now, we probably don't want to get into the scores themselves too much, what that means, minus 2.5 and or higher or whatever, but that's part of the reporting. But what I do want to highlight, what I also really appreciated about my my REMS report was graphically, I could understand in an instant where I sat bone density wise and bone strength wise, because, was I like the lights at the the traffic lights. Am I in the red zone, the yellow zone, or the green zone? Whereas when I I ask my doctor for everything, and she's very good. We get on very, very well, and she knows that I like to ask a lot of questions. And she shared with me the report from the radiologist from my DEXA scan, and it's literally a whole bunch of text, in 2 lines, and it just says, result osteoporotic. So from a patient point of view, from my point of view as a patient, I appreciate the extra information and how it's delivered to me as well, because I can understand it. And now because I understand it better, I'm more empowered to do something with it. And I think that's also a very important part of the conversation, because that's why this podcast exists. We want to open up people's eyes and ears and minds to a whole lot of new information, so that they can then feel more confident asking the questions of their health team to get the right outcome for them. And everyone's going to need, a different solution set for that outcome. But it's really important to feel empowered, that you have agency in that process, rather than going to an appointment when you're in your 70s, you've gone for your first DEXA, it shows that you're osteoporotic, and the answer is, here's a pill. Now, I'm not anti-pill by any means, but what it means is that we've left it too long. The window of opportunity to change our situation is so small now, it's almost closed, and that's our best option. And there are consequences to taking that as well. Now, in some instances, it's very well needed, very much needed. But like we said earlier, if we start earlier, we have the ability to change that outcome with a lot of other interventions other than that. So, yeah, the information on those reports also helps enormously as well. Is there anything else? I also had some notes here to ask you. We talked about the reliability, the repeatability, whereas so it's very every time a scan is done, it's reliable, in terms of its accuracy each time it's repeated, and that's important to know as well. But we also talked about with mobility the importance of having strong muscles too. So bones and muscles are besties. You look after your bones and you look after your muscles, and you maximize your mobility and independence. So might be a bit left field, but is there a way to understand our muscle health with a REMS scan? And I'm putting you on the spot here.
So the answer to your question is no, there's not.
Right.
I am hoping there is some research going on into muscle integrity using REMS. So the condition is called sarcopenia. So it's where your muscle condition, if you like, and they are doing research in that area. They've published an abstract. Those of us are incredibly excited about, literally imagine doing 2 scans, one looking at your bone, one looking at your muscle integrity. It'll be incredible. There are a couple of us in Australia and around the world who are looking to put together a sort of a wider assessment, which would also look at muscle integrity. The way it's done at the moment largely is with grip strength. So if I go back to one of the comments we made at the start, REMS can look at your bone density and can look at your bone strength. We can do a grip strength to give an idea of muscle integrity. And then there are a number of tests to assess balance. And if you've got those 4 things that you are working on, then that is your best way to try and reduce your fracture risk. And your clinician, your clinical team can actually help you in those ways as well. And I'm not just talking about your GP, but your physiotherapist, your exercise physiologist, your nutritionist. So, we haven't touched on, we touched on nutrition earlier, but if your nutrition is poor, and there could be for a variety of reasons, then your bones are going to suffer from it. Calcium, vitamin D, vitamin K, protein, these are all well-known elements in order to maximize your bone integrity. But you're right, bones and muscles are very good friends, and the strength training will help both, often will help balance as well, which I think
Yeah.
is critical.
Yeah.
Medications may be required. And I will make this point about medications. There is a lot of there's a lot of communication about medications. The medication game is also changing. There are actually 2 new products available in Australia now, and it's not about what you start; it's also about what's Plan B and Plan C.
Yeah.
So when I talk to my patients and they ask me about medication, I say medication's a personal journey. It's between you and your doctor, but I also encourage you to consider having an appointment with an endocrinologist.
Hmm.
So these are the guys that really specialize in this, and it shouldn't just be a set and forget prescription. It really should be, what's our plan? If the first one doesn't work, what's the second? What's the third? What's our journey going to look like?
Yeah, it's an awesome point that you make. Absolutely. And again, personally, I've moved on from my endocrinologist that I had originally because I felt that I wasn't getting, we didn't have the conversation about what that plan looked like. And a significant chunk of that plan was missing. I certainly, because I've gone down lots of rabbit holes doing what I do with writing newsletters and doing these podcasts. And, it's now recognized that hormone therapy, hormones help women too, as
Mm.
part of the solution set. And, I was told because I didn't have any symptoms that that's why we never had the discussion. But that's what I want women to know. Arm yourself with information so you can have conversations and talk it out, because you do need that plan A, B, and C along the way for the rest, for your longevity and your health span. Absolutely. So we've talked a lot. Thank you, David. You've given us a lot to think about, why we need to get our bone health understood and the importance of it and how that typically happens and how it can happen using REMS as a REM scan as an option in that solution set, a tool in our toolbox. What about if we want to get a REM scan done? Where do we go for that? And I know this is just the beginning in Australia so far. Like you said, you've only been at it for a little while, but I know it's growing, it's exploding. Where are you? Where can ladies and men in their lives get a scan done? And what's that going to look like going forward?
Sure. No, thank you. So when we started in Melbourne, in sort of home territory, and about I'm going to say a quarter of my patients were flying into state for this REM scan, and that was
Wow,
very humbling. That was incredibly humbling.
that's huge. Wow.
Yeah, it was, because they had heard about it. They were desperate to get this understanding of what's my bone integrity like. Um, Jo, my nurse in Brisbane, God bless her, she said to me, she gave me an ultimatum. She said, "Listen, I'm going to get REMS here, or there's going to be trouble." I said, "All right, we'll get you a device." I trained Jo, and she's now running around Brisbane, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, sort of with pop-up clinics.
Yep.
All the people in Sydney started sending me very nasty emails saying, "Did you know there's a place between Melbourne and Brisbane? It's a very nice place." There are now 2 clinics in Sydney. They are independent of us, but they have been trained by me.
Mhm.
And so they are incredibly good and competent. One is a very large physiotherapy clinic. One is an endocrinologist.
Mhm.
So he's actually brought REMS into his practice as well.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And there are more groups that are coming on. So we're training in the Sunshine Coast actually in about 2 weeks' time. So there's a clinic setting up there. So it's slowly starting to open up, and I think our vision. We are working quite closely with the endocrinology community, with the osteoporosis guideline experts, with DEXA experts, because there are many questions that are also coming up. And what if DEXA and REMS don't actually answer the question for that individual? What do they do then? So we're actually coming up with recommendations for what's the step after that as well. What if there's discordance between the DEXA and the REMS? What do you believe then? So this is a learning space. And you're absolutely right. The reports do give you a lot of information, and we can tell you what the report says. How that report is interpreted by you and your clinical team is a really good discussion to have with your doctor and your clinical team, because the report gives you a lot of numbers. But one thing the medical community, the bone experts of the world are actually saying, we should stop focusing on the numbers. We should start focusing on the fracture risk. And we use the numbers to track. We use the numbers to position. But we use that as you say, as a tool to ensure that you have optimal health as we move forward. So there are those clinics available. I think if you Google search REMS in Australia, it'll come up. They're on the echolite.com.au. Ecolite is the brand of the device. There is a tab that says find a clinic. So all the clinics in Australia are actually listed there as well.
And then Jo, who we've talked about. Hello, Jo, because I know she'll be listening. She told me. I had a chat with Jo yesterday, actually. God love Jo. She works with you at Bone Compass, doesn't she? So that's the other place to go, is bonecompass.com.au. Is that right, David?
Yes,
I'm going to try and add. Yeah. So I'll put that all in the show notes too. So ecolite.com.au.
Yep. And that will find other clinics around Australia.
Everyone.
Or our own individual clinics are at bonecompass.com.au.
Okay. Great. And the other thing I might get off you and put in the show notes as links, I've been educating my GP about REMS. I've been educating 2 endocrinologists now about REMS because they didn't know. So ladies, don't be surprised when you go to them and you say, look, I've listened to this fantastic podcast with about REMS technology for my bone health. Did you know about it? You might get an answer that's no. So what they will want, and even my radiologist friend, didn't know about it. So I would like to put some links to some research as well, so that if the girls want to print that off or share the link with their health team, they can be informed, because they will want to know about that research that you talked about. They need to know that this is not a fly-by-night kind of technology, that it is, it's rigid and it's trustworthy and reliable.
No, definitely. And the TGA certificate really should give them a lot of confidence in that. In fact, I'm one of only a few countries in the world that submitted the fragility score to TGA for assessment, and TGA have now approved the fragility score as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Yes. So we also put that through the regulators. So look, it is definitely rigid, and it's definitely here to stay. It's definitely going to grow, and it's going to add value to your listeners, to patients, and to really identify some patients who are, I think, in real need of additional support that might be missed. And equally, I think it'll help debunk some of the myths around density and fracture risk, because it really will put into context, what's my density, what's my bone strength, what's my fracture risk. And yes, it is very reliable. It is very reproducible, and therefore it's a way of tracking going forward.
They're absolutely. And the other thing I love about it is that it's mobile.
Yes.
we haven't really touched on that. So it's recommended, because of the errors in DEXAs that can occur, that you go back to the same machine each time to get your DEXA scan done to reduce that error in reporting. And then it also depends on, the positioning that you put in. But to have to go back to actually find a DEXA scan machine near where you live, and to go back to the same one every 2 years, because DEXA picks up changes in bone, 18 months, 2 years,
Yeah.
it can be a challenge. But then we now have this technology, and that's the other advantage I love about it too, is it's mobile. So that's why Joe's out there doing clinics on the Sunshine Coast and in Brisbane and down on the Gold Coast, is because she can, I'm assuming she chucks it in a car and away she goes.
Yes, when I first presented to TGA, I had a photo of the device in the overhead locker of Qantas, and so when I say it's mobile, it's really mobile. No, look, it is definitely mobile, but I think people, as more and more clinics become available, and I encourage anyone who's a healthcare professional to look at adding this to their offering suite for patients. It is definitely mobile, and it's because of the engineering of the device took out those sources of error. So it took out the error of the operator. So whether I'm scanning, Joe's scanning, or whoever's scanning it, that's all been taken out, designed out, as has the patient positioning. So you don't need to be absolutely lying flat. We've scanned people who have had to sit up slightly. I've scanned people standing up. We've scanned people in a wheelchair if we've had to.
Fantastic.
If we can find that bone, then we can scan it.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredibly powerful,
Yeah.
particularly for those who have actually had a fracture or fracture clinics. But yes, there's also some sources of error that DEXA can't get around, and one of those is osteoarthritis and bone spurs, bone artifacts. DEXA will see those as positive, and sometimes I'm having difficult conversations with people because it's like, I thought my bones were okay, but then now you're telling me they're a lot worse, and that's because some of those artifacts have artificially inflated the result from
the density result.
The density result.
Yeah, right.
Whereas this technology is able to bypass those artifacts. So
Mm.
I think clinicians should not only feel confident that it's Rigi-Dig, they actually should feel more empowered, because some of these patients may not be getting the therapy they need or the interventions they need, simply because they're not able to get the minus 2.5 that they need to instigate things. And so, this is another opportunity. It's a second opinion.
Yes, it's a second opinion. And that's exactly what I did. I got that second opinion, and yeah, I'm so glad I did, because this is such good news and the future is bright. Thank you so much, David. I think that's a wrap. Is there anything else you wanted to leave us with, other than go out and get a REM scan, go out and get a bone scan?
Yes, grab your male partner, friend, brother, whomever, bring them in, because men need scans as well. And this technology really, I think, is very important for men, because it looks like men become more fragile before they lose density. So, I don't. This is one of my own personal endeavors to really try and elevate men's health as well. So yes, please organise the double date, the double booking. Go and have a REM scan. And yeah, like with your with these podcasts, being correctly informed, being interested in your own health, understanding those, the reports. Interpreting the reports is different. Understanding the report, we can help there. Interpreting the report, that's your clinical team, and how you do that. But we are delighted to be part of this journey. We are delighted to be the disruptor.
Yes.
It's a fascinating place. So wish me luck, Anita.
Oh, all the luck in the world, David, but you won't need luck because I know that in time and in the not too distant future, it'll stand on its own 2 feet and it will fly. So it's very much needed and it will absolutely fly. Thank you.
Right.
We might actually get Joe in one day and we'll talk a little bit more about the practicalities of it, but we'll keep this dialogue going. And girls, absolutely look up bonecompass.com.au and echolight.com.au and book in for your REMS scan near you. Thanks so much. Look out for the show notes for those research links and also valuable links to where you can get your scans done. Thanks so much, David. Really appreciate your knowledge, your dedication, your passion, and to you as a disruptor. Let's go.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk, and it's been delightful. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone. Hang in there, David. We're going to...
Thank you for joining us for Midlife Unfiltered. If you loved this episode, you're going to love what's coming next. Be sure you're subscribed on your platform of choice so you don't miss a thing.
We'd also be delighted and for sure do a little happy dance if you took the time to leave us a rating and review. Those not only absolutely make our day, but more importantly, it helps other women who may be wanting something more from their midlife to know about us and to listen in as well. You can connect with us on socials too. You'll find links to connect on LinkedIn, Instagram, and email in the show notes.